The first hard freeze came 3 weeks after the motel changed hands. By 7 that evening, the parking lot had gone silver around the edges, and Dana Mercer was checking the occupancy board when Calvin Reed stepped through the lobby door. He carried a canvas duffel in one hand and a small cream-colored envelope in the other. He did not ask whether room 12 was empty. He could see its brass key hanging behind the desk. Dana could see it too, but she left it there. First, she checked the night's arrivals. Then the 2 rooms Aaron Patel had blocked because their heaters were unreliable. Calvin placed the envelope beside the register and said, "Same question as last winter." Dana opened the occupancy screen again before answering. The motel was less than half full, but the rules had changed with the ownership. She said, "Tonight might be simple. The rest of the winter isn't mine to promise." Calvin nodded once. He did not reach for the key.
Calvin asked whether the old winter term still meant anything now that Aaron owned the place. He kept his voice level, more like a customer asking about a rate than someone asking for a favor. Dana told him she still had authority to discount rooms on low occupancy winter nights, especially the older units that were harder to sell. But that authority belonged to a shift, not a season. Calvin said, "Then don't promise me a season." He reminded her that he had never expected room 12 to sit waiting for him if the motel needed it. Dana looked at the key again. Room 12 was at the far end of the ground floor, close to the service closet and close enough to the highway that truck brakes could be heard after midnight. It was also one of the last rooms most travelers chose. Dana said she could authorize that night under the policy still in her desk. Calvin pushed the envelope an inch closer and said, "Then write down what I paid." Same as always.
Dana counted the bills from Calvin's envelope twice before entering the amount. It was less than half the posted winter rate, but it was not zero. She printed the electronic receipt for the cash portion, then pulled a thick paper ledger from the lower drawer beneath the register. Aaron had kept the old books after buying the property because several parts of the motel's accounting still lived on paper. Dana turned to the current month, wrote Calvin Reed beside room 12, added the cash amount, and paused at the balance column. Instead of writing complimentary, she added 2 small initials and a short line beside them. Calvin watched without asking what she was writing. Dana closed the book before handing him the key. "One night under my shift authority," she said. "Tomorrow gets decided tomorrow." Calvin tucked the receipt into his wallet. Dana's hand stayed on the ledger a moment longer than it needed to. The notation had looked ordinary to her for years. Under new ownership, she knew it might not look ordinary to anyone else.
Calvin carried his duffel toward room 12, but he stopped near the vending alcove when his hand brushed the stair rail. One bracket shifted against the wall with a dull click. He crouched just enough to look at it, then called back toward the desk and asked Dana whether the rail was already on the maintenance list. Dana came around the counter and checked the bracket herself. She told him it had been reported that afternoon. Calvin asked whether she wanted him to take care of it before someone leaned too hard on the rail. Dana answered immediately, "Not tonight. Not unless there's a work authorization and we agree on it first." Calvin straightened and took his hand off the rail. "Fine by me." Dana put a strip of warning tape across the loose section and logged the hazard for the morning. Calvin continued down the walkway without argument. Whatever the old winter arrangement was, his room did not make him an unpaid handyman, and Dana did not treat every loose screw as a debt he owed for sleeping indoors. By then, one question had settled over the lobby more heavily than the cold outside. Why did Dana have a special way of writing room 12 into the winter ledger? And what exactly was Calvin paying for when the posted rate said something else? If this story has drawn you in, please subscribe and leave a like. Now, let us continue. Dana finished the hazard report, locked the cash drawer, and looked through the lobby window toward room 12. Calvin had turned on only one lamp. His truck remained backed into the same outer parking space he had chosen when he arrived, with his duffel no longer on the passenger seat. Nothing about the evening looked dramatic. A guest had paid cash. A clerk had used a permitted winter discount. A room that might otherwise have stayed empty was occupied, but beneath Dana's hand inside the closed ledger, Two initials sat beside a balance that had not been collected. Before leaving the desk for her rounds, she moved the ledger from the counter back into the drawer.
Aaron arrived before 8 the next morning with coffee, a laptop, and the expression of someone still learning which problems belonged to an old building and which belonged to the people running it. He had owned the motel for less than a month and was reviewing every nightly report himself. When he reached room 12, he stopped. The posted winter rate appeared in one column. Calvin's cash payment appeared in another. Aaron checked for a promotional code, a service recovery note, or a manager comp. There was none. He carried the receipt to the desk and asked Dana why a rentable room had gone out for less than half price. He did not accuse her of taking money or hiding a guest. He simply pointed to the numbers. Dana told him room 12 was one of the units she was authorized to discount when winter occupancy fell below the former policy threshold. Aaron asked how low that discount could go. Dana said the written policy gave the senior night clerk a range of discretion. Aaron set down his coffee. "Then show me the policy."
Dana opened the bottom file drawer and removed a worn operations binder. The page she showed Aaron was older than the purchase agreement, but still part of the motel's active procedures because no replacement policy had been issued yet. It allowed the senior clerk to reduce rates on low-demand winter nights, comp limited emergency stays, and authorize certain small operational adjustments within stated boundaries. Aaron read the page carefully. He asked whether Dana had exceeded the rate authority the night before. She said she had not. He asked whether Calvin had paid the amount shown on the receipt. She said he had, in cash, and the drawer balanced. Aaron's shoulders eased slightly, but then he opened the paper ledger. Beside Calvin's remaining balance were the two initials Dana had written the previous night. Aaron circled them with a pencil. "What does this mean?" Dana looked at the circle before answering. She said it was part of how the winter account had been tracked. Aaron asked, "Whose account?" Dana said, "Calvin's." She did not explain further.
Marisol Vega reached room 12 after Calvin had left for the morning. The heater was set low, the towels were stacked beside the sink, and the sheets had already been stripped from the bed and folded loosely at the foot. Calvin had tied his trash bag and placed it near the door. When Aaron came by, Marisol told him Calvin always made the room easy to turn. Aaron asked whether that meant room 12 cost the motel almost nothing when Calvin stayed there. Marisol gave him a look and said, "Easy isn't free." The sheets still had to be washed. The bathroom still had to be cleaned. Heat ran all night when the temperature dropped. Soap, towels, electricity, hot water, and her staff's time did not disappear because a guest was careful. Then she added that Calvin caused fewer problems than plenty of people who paid full rate. Aaron asked whether she knew about the strange ledger marks. Marisol said she had seen them. She also said, "If you want to know what Dana wrote, ask Dana."
Aaron waited until the front desk quieted, then carried the current ledger into the back office. On the lowest shelf of a metal cabinet, he found earlier books labeled by year. He pulled the previous winter first. Calvin Reed appeared in December beside room 12. Then again in January. The amounts changed from stay to stay. Some entries showed straightforward cash payments. Others carried the same initials Dana had written the night before. Aaron opened another year. Calvin's name was there again. Another year produced the same pattern. Room 12, winter dates, uneven payments, brief notations, occasional gaps. It was not a simple recurring discount. If it had been, Aaron could have understood it from one rate code. Instead, the ledger looked like a private language between someone behind the desk and someone who kept returning when the nights turned cold. Aaron placed 3 books side by side and began marking the dates on a legal pad. The pattern stretched farther back than he expected.
The more Aaron compared the books, the less tidy the pattern became. One January entry made room 12 look almost free. 4 nights later, Calvin paid an ordinary reduced cash rate. In another winter, he checked out for 2 nights, while room 12 was rented to someone else at full price, then returned after the weekend. Some stays ended after a single night. Others continued through a stretch of low occupancy, with small, unexplained credits appearing beside the balance. Aaron checked the nightly occupancy sheets to make sure Dana had not invented empty rooms, but room 12 was real, and so were the guests, who sometimes replaced Calvin in it. That made the ledger harder to dismiss as obvious theft and harder to accept as ordinary business. He calculated one set of balances using the posted rate and immediately disliked the number he saw. Then he stopped himself. Posted rate was not the same as money the motel would actually have collected from an empty room in January. He closed the calculator and went back to the entries.
Aaron brought the current ledger back to the front desk before Dana's afternoon shift ended. He told her he was not accusing her of stealing, but he could not allow any more unexplained credits to be added while he was responsible for the property. Until he understood the initials, every room 12 stay had to be handled under ordinary written rate authority only. Dana did not argue with the decision. She asked whether Calvin could finish the 2 nights already discussed at the reduced cash rate if occupancy stayed low. Aaron checked the reservation screen and said yes, as long as no additional balance was converted into anything he could not trace. Dana called Calvin rather than letting him discover the change at checkout. She told him the old arrangement was suspended while Aaron reviewed the records. Calvin was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked whether the reduced cash rate itself was still legitimate. Dana said it was. He replied, "Then that's what I'll pay while it's legitimate. Nothing else goes in that book for me."
Calvin came to the desk that evening with the room 12 key in his palm instead of his pocket. He placed it beside the register and told Dana he could cover 2 more nights at the reduced cash rate she was still authorized to offer. After that, if Aaron had not decided what the motel could honor, Calvin would make another plan. Dana said he did not have to turn in the key until checkout. Calvin left it on the counter anyway while she processed the next payment, as if he wanted the terms settled before he carried it back down the walkway. Aaron stood near the office doorway listening without interrupting. When Dana handed Calvin a receipt, he picked up the key and said, 2 nights. That's clear enough. After he left for room 12, Aaron returned to the metal cabinet. He stacked 6 winter ledgers in his arms and carried them into the back office. Dana watched the door close behind him. Calvin had a room for 2 nights. After that, the old books would have to explain what Dana had not.
Aaron began with the 6 winter ledgers, but the initials made no sense until he found a second set of books in a cabinet near the maintenance closet. They were narrow, spiral notebooks, one for each year, filled with dates, room numbers, supply costs, and short descriptions of repairs. He laid the oldest one beside the oldest ledger and started matching dates. A pair of initials beside Calvin's room 12 balance appeared on the same day as a note about a sticking exterior door. Another matched a clogged drain after an ice storm. Aaron checked 3 more entries and found the same pattern. The amounts did not disappear at random. They moved from the guest balance to a handwritten maintenance line. By late morning, he had a yellow pad covered with dates and arrows. Dana's ledger shorthand had been crude, but it was not meaningless. What had looked like a private discount code was connected to actual work performed somewhere on the property. Aaron leaned back in the office chair and stared at the 2 books. He had found an explanation, but not yet a justification.
Aaron spent the next hour checking the entries one by one. One winter, Calvin had replaced a broken hydraulic door closer on the laundry entrance after Dana recorded the part cost separately. Another entry showed 2 hours clearing ice from an exterior drain that had backed water toward the ground floor rooms. A January note described a heater limit switch in room 7 that had tripped repeatedly until Calvin reset it and cleaned debris from the intake. There was also a luggage cart repair, complete with a hardware store receipt for a wheel and axle bolt. Aaron found the receipts stapled into the notebooks where Dana had written the material totals. The motel had paid for the parts. Calvin's lodging balance had been reduced for labor. Nothing in the notebook suggested he had charged materials twice or invented work that never happened. Still, Aaron noticed something else. There was no single hourly rate. Dana had written flat credits beside each job, and the amounts changed depending on the task. He ran his finger down the page and said quietly, So what decided the number?
Some credits looked modest enough that Aaron almost understood them immediately. A minor cart repair had reduced Calvin's balance by less than the motel would likely have paid for an outside service call. A frozen drain cleanup had been valued below what a contractor might have charged on short notice, but the later notebooks were less consistent. One entry for replacing 2 door closers carried a credit Aaron considered generous. Another gave Calvin nearly a full night's reduced rate for a repair that appeared, on paper, to have taken little more than an hour. Aaron wrote question marks beside those amounts rather than conclusions. Small motels rarely bought labor at neat hourly rates. A contractor could charge a trip fee before touching a wrench, and an urgent winter repair at night could cost more than the work itself. But Dana had not documented those comparisons. She had simply written a number and moved on. The missing explanation mattered. If she had been using business judgment, Aaron needed to see the judgment. If she had been using sympathy, he needed to know where the motel's policy had ended and Dana's personal choice had begun.
When Aaron asked Dana where the arrangement had started, she did not answer with the ledger. She told him to go back 6 winters, to a night when Calvin had been an ordinary paying guest in room 9, because room 12 was already occupied. The temperature had fallen fast after midnight. An exterior water line near the rear walkway froze, then split at a fitting behind an access panel. Dana heard the pump cycling and found water spreading under the utility door toward 2 guest rooms. Calvin had been outside moving his truck when he saw her struggling with the shutoff valve. He asked what she needed. Dana told him where the main valve was, and together they stopped the flow before water reached the rooms. Calvin then helped isolate the damaged section until the plumber arrived the next morning. Dana reminded Aaron that Calvin had already paid for his room that night. He wasn't staying here because of a deal, she said. The deal didn't exist yet. Aaron asked whether Calvin had presented himself as a contractor. Dana shook her head. No. He was a guest who knew what he was looking at. Dana said the former owner had offered Calvin 2 free nights afterward because the flooding had been stopped before it damaged occupied rooms. Calvin refused. He told them that helping with an emergency was not the same as buying a room, and he did not want a favor hanging over the next time he checked in. A few weeks later, when he returned during another cold stretch, he asked Dana a different question. If the motel had small maintenance jobs it was already planning to pay someone to handle, could part of that value be applied against his room while he still paid something in cash? Dana said Calvin was specific about the terms. He would not work automatically because he was staying there. He would not take a job unless Dana described it first, and they agreed on a credit amount before he started. He also insisted on a minimum cash payment every night he occupied the room. Aaron asked why that mattered so much to him. Dana answered carefully. Because he wanted a room account, not a debt to me. She left it there. Aaron asked whether the former owner had ever approved any of this in writing. Dana went to the same operations binder she had shown him before, but this time she removed an envelope taped inside the back cover. The paper inside was 6 years old and carried the former owner's signature. It referred to Dana's existing off-season authority and allowed limited lodging credit for pre-approved on-site maintenance when occupancy remained below the motel's winter threshold. Calvin's name appeared in the note, but there was no promise of room 12 forever, no guaranteed number of nights, and no fixed annual benefit. The authorization also said that normal cash minimums and occupancy restrictions still applied. Aaron read it twice. It was more than a verbal story, but less than a contract. He asked why Dana had never converted the arrangement into something cleaner. Dana said the former owner had considered the note sufficient because the work was small, the room was usually empty, and every winter they expected the motel might be sold or the arrangement might simply stop. Temporary lasted longer than anybody planned, she said. Aaron folded the page back along its old crease.
Marisol listened to Dana explain the signed note, then asked Aaron whether he wanted the version that never made it into the maintenance books. She said room 12 could be easy to clean when Calvin stayed there, but easy still required labor. If he remained 3 or 4 nights, her staff still changed towels, emptied trash, cleaned the bathroom, and ran sheets through machines that did not become cheaper because the room rate was low. There were also weekends when the parking lot filled faster than Dana expected. Marisol remembered at least 2 nights when Dana could probably have moved Calvin out and sold room 12 at a higher rate. Instead, Dana let him stay because it was bitterly cold, and sending him away for one busy night felt harsh. Dana started to object, then stopped. Marisol told Aaron she was not saying Calvin had demanded those exceptions. Most of the time, he was ready to leave if she told him to. She looked at Dana. Sometimes she didn't tell him. The distinction changed the room again. Not every cost had come from Calvin's bargain. Some had come from Dana protecting it.
Dana admitted Marisol was right. The written threshold had been clear, but winter occupancy could change within hours. A road closure, a power outage in another part of town, or a group of stranded drivers could turn a quiet night into a full parking lot. Dana said there had been times when Calvin was already checked into room 12, and the motel later climbed above the level where she normally would have protected the discounted stay. She had occasionally left him in place rather than tell him to pack for a single night. Aaron asked whether she had documented those decisions. Dana said no. She had written occupancy numbers and room revenue, but not the reason she chose not to reclaim room 12. I told myself it wasn't worth moving one person for one night, she said. Sometimes that was probably true. Sometimes I was deciding what felt decent and calling it operations. Aaron did not answer immediately. Dana added that she should have forced the issue into writing years ago, especially once the same exception began repeating. She did not ask Aaron to excuse it.
By that afternoon, the room 12 entries no longer looked like a secret free room. Calvin had paid cash. He had completed specific work. Dana had acted under real authority, and the former owner had signed off on a limited version of the exchange. But the clearer the arrangement became, the harder it was to call it harmless. A discounted room still used heat, water, linens, and staff time. A maintenance credit could be reasonable and still be set too generously. A clerk could make a humane choice and still spend money that belonged to the business. Marisol could respect Calvin and still resent costs that disappeared into someone else's shorthand. The problem was no longer deciding whether one person had been good and another had been wrong. The problem was that several reasonable choices had been layered on top of each other for years without anyone forcing them into one account. Aaron now knew what the initials bought. He still had to decide what those purchases had actually cost.
Aaron built the first calculation the simplest way possible. He took every winter night Calvin had occupied room 12, multiplied those nights by the motel's posted rate for that year, then subtracted Calvin's cash payments and the maintenance credits Dana had entered. The difference was large enough to make him sit back from the spreadsheet. For several minutes, it looked like 6 years of lost room revenue. Then Aaron returned to the occupancy books. On many of Calvin's nights, room 12 had been one of 10 or 15 empty rooms. Charging Calvin the full retail rate on paper did not mean another traveler would have appeared to pay it. He separated nights when the motel had empty inventory from nights when room 12 might realistically have been sold. The frightening total dropped immediately. He also removed credits attached to documented repairs that the motel would otherwise have needed to handle somehow. The calculation became messier and more honest. Aaron rubbed out the original total on his legal pad until the paper tore slightly beneath the pencil.
The second calculation took most of the evening. Aaron estimated the extra winter utilities for an occupied ground floor room, the cost of laundering sheets and towels, housekeeping time, guest supplies, and a share of routine wear. He marked the handful of nights when room 12 might have displaced a higher-paying guest. Against those costs, he credited Calvin's cash payments and assigned conservative outside labor values to the documented repairs. He did not give Dana the benefit of every number she had chosen. Where a credit appeared too high for the work described, he reduced it to what he believed the motel could reasonably defend. When he finished, the arrangement still showed a cost to the property. It had not secretly paid for itself, but the cost was a fraction of the retail rate loss he had calculated that morning. More important, The number now had components he could explain. Some belonged to Calvin's reduced lodging, some belonged to real maintenance work, some belonged to Dana's undocumented exceptions, and some belonged to operating a heated room in winter, no matter who slept in it.
The next morning, Aaron found Calvin near the front walkway, brushing a thin layer of ice from the windshield of his truck. He asked whether Calvin had a few minutes before leaving. Calvin looked toward the office and asked whether Dana needed to be there. Aaron said no. "I think she has been carrying enough of this conversation for both of you." Calvin considered that, then followed him inside. Aaron placed the revised cost worksheet on the small table beside the oldest ledger and the signed authorization note. He told Calvin he now understood that the winter arrangement had included actual work and real cash payments. He also said the motel had carried costs that nobody had tracked clearly, and Dana had made exceptions Aaron could not simply inherit without reviewing them. Calvin pulled out a chair but did not sit yet. He said, "If your answer is no, tell me no. I can work with a clear answer." Aaron said he was not ready to give one until they discussed the terms directly. Calvin finally sat. Aaron turned the worksheet so both of them could read it. Aaron kept the revised worksheet between them and told Calvin that the audit had changed one important thing. He no longer believed Dana had been stealing rooms, hiding cash, or inventing work to cover favors. The cash deposits matched. The maintenance entries matched real jobs. The former owner had given Dana limited authority to make the arrangement. But Aaron said that did not mean he could keep it exactly as it was. Too much depended on Dana deciding night by night what a repair was worth, when the occupancy threshold could bend, and how much of room 12's cost the motel should absorb. Calvin listened without interrupting. Aaron said, "I bought the property, which means I bought the bills and the risks too. I can't run a private rate that changes because one employee remembers why it made sense 6 years ago." Calvin glanced at the old ledger. He said he understood the problem. Then he asked the question Aaron had been avoiding. "Are you ending it, or are you trying to replace it?" Aaron said. He was trying to find out whether there was anything worth replacing.
Aaron suggested one simple option first. Calvin could receive a standing winter discount on room 12 whenever occupancy was low, with no maintenance credits attached. The rate would be easier to explain and easier to enter into the reservation system. Calvin shook his head before Aaron finished. He said a discount by itself was not the arrangement he had agreed to all those years. Aaron pointed out that Calvin would still be paying cash. Calvin answered that the work mattered because it made the exchange specific. He was not asking the motel to decide he deserved cheaper shelter. He was paying what they agreed he could pay, and sometimes trading useful labor that the motel had chosen in advance. "Take the work out, and it becomes you deciding I'm a charity case," he said. Aaron told him that was not how he meant it. Calvin said intention was not the only thing that mattered. If the motel wanted to sell him a discounted room, it could do that like any other rate. But if Aaron was replacing their winter arrangement, Calvin wanted the part he had helped negotiate to remain visible rather than be rewritten as generosity offered to him. Aaron asked what Calvin would do if there were no arrangement at all. Calvin took a moment before answering, not because he had no plan, but because he disliked explaining it. During milder stretches, he slept in the insulated camper shell mounted on his truck. He rented a parking space at a fenced storage lot on the edge of town, and the manager there allowed overnight use as long as he followed the rules and moved the truck when asked. He had a battery bank, a small electric blanket, and enough insulation for nights that stayed above the worst cold. When the temperature dropped hard, he did not gamble with it. He paid for a motel for a night or two if his monthly budget allowed. Sometimes it was this motel. Sometimes it was somewhere cheaper. Aaron asked whether Calvin had ever expected room 12 to solve the whole winter. Calvin said no. It made the worst weeks manageable. That's different. He added that if Aaron ended the arrangement, Calvin would adjust. He would not like it, but he would not pretend the motel owed him a room because Dana had once found a way to make the numbers work.
Aaron opened a blank document on his laptop and proposed a structure neither of them had used before. Room 12 could carry a documented seasonal rate when the motel remained below the agreed occupancy threshold. Calvin would still pay a minimum amount in cash every occupied night. Separate from that rate, he could accept small maintenance jobs for lodging credit. But the total credit would be capped each month, and every job would need approval before work began. Aaron also drew a hard line around the kind of work Calvin could perform. No electrical panels, no roof work, no major plumbing, no gas appliances, and nothing that the motel's insurer or local rules expected a licensed contractor to handle. Calvin asked whether Aaron thought the old jobs had been unsafe. Aaron said not all of them, but the old notebooks included work he would not authorize now simply because the liability belonged to the business. He gave an example. Tightening hardware on a luggage cart was one thing. Opening a live electrical panel because a heater failed at midnight was another. Calvin nodded and said that boundary made sense to him. The dollar cap bothered him less than Aaron expected.
The problem appeared several paragraphs later. Aaron had written that when approved maintenance work was available, Calvin would perform it before receiving the reduced seasonal rate. Calvin read the sentence twice, then pushed the laptop back across the table. He said the clause turned a voluntary exchange into an obligation tied to his room. Aaron argued that he was trying to prevent the motel from carrying a discounted stay while ordinary maintenance sat undone. Calvin replied, "Then don't offer me the job. But if staying here means I have to be ready whenever something breaks, I'm not a guest anymore." Aaron looked at the sentence again. Calvin reminded him that under the old arrangement, Dana asked about a task, named the proposed credit, and Calvin could accept or refuse. Aaron admitted the draft had gone further than that. He deleted the sentence. In its place, he wrote that Calvin could decline any maintenance task without losing access to the established guest rate, and that declined work would simply create no lodging credit. Calvin read the new language and said, "That's closer." Neither man called it finished.
Dana learned about Aaron's new policy before she learned whether Calvin would accept the draft. Aaron called her into the office and explained that the change would apply to every barter arrangement, not just room 12. She could still use the winter discount authority within a narrower range, approve small service recovery comps, and make routine operational decisions. But any labor for lodging credit above a modest threshold would require Aaron's written approval. Dana read the page and said, "So you trust me less?" Aaron answered that he trusted her enough to keep her managing winter nights, but he did not trust a system that left years of financial decisions inside one person's memory. Dana said the distinction felt cleaner from his side of the desk. She had spent years making decisions. At 2 in the morning when a pipe froze, a guest lost a wallet, or a room sat empty while someone needed a bed. Aaron said he was not asking her to stop making decisions. He was asking the motel to record who carried the cost. Dana signed the policy acknowledgement. Her handwriting was steady, but she pressed hard enough to leave an imprint on the page beneath it.
Marisol read the proposed room 12 terms during her lunch break and found a different omission. The draft listed the minimum cash payment, maintenance credits, and occupancy cutoff, but it treated the room rate as if housekeeping were already covered by whatever remained. She told Aaron that was exactly how invisible costs stayed invisible. Calvin could leave the room tidy, but someone still washed the linens, sanitized the bathroom, restocked supplies, and checked the room before the next guest. Marisol did not ask Aaron to charge Calvin the same cleaning burden as a full-rate traveler. She asked him to put a modest, fixed housekeeping component into the nightly minimum so the arrangement stopped pretending that labor disappeared when a room was discounted. Calvin, who had come in midway through the conversation, said he had no objection as long as the amount was stated before he checked in. Dana was quieter. Aaron added the charge to the draft. The new minimum was still substantially below the ordinary winter rate, but it was higher than Calvin had paid under some previous years. Calvin read the number and said he could manage it during the coldest stretches, though not indefinitely.
The draft had not even been signed when the highway closed west of town late Friday afternoon. Freezing rain turned an overpass into a sheet of glass, and traffic officers began sending stranded drivers toward the nearest exits. By 6, Aaron's reservation screen was changing faster than Dana could answer the phone. Rooms that usually sat empty in December disappeared one after another. A family took room 9. 2 truck drivers split room 10. A traveling nurse booked the last upstairs single. Room 12 was still occupied by Calvin under the reduced rate, but the motel now had more callers than beds. The old winter threshold had been crossed decisively. Dana checked the outside temperature. It was expected to fall into the teens overnight. Aaron looked at the draft agreement, then at the live occupancy screen. Under both the old policy and the proposed new one, Room 12 could be released at full rate once demand reached that level. The timing made every principle they had discussed feel less theoretical. A rule was easy to defend when the room would otherwise stay dark. Dana was already preparing an argument when Calvin came through the lobby carrying his duffel. He had seen the parking lot filling and checked the motel's vacancy sign from outside. Before Aaron or Dana could say anything, Calvin placed the Room 12 key on the counter. Dana told him the temperature was dropping and asked where he planned to go. Calvin said he would work that out after he cleared the room. She reminded him that the new agreement was not final and that Aaron could still choose to make an exception for one night. Calvin looked at Aaron and said he did not want the first test of written boundaries to be everyone ignoring them because the weather made the choice uncomfortable. Dana said, "You don't have to prove anything." Calvin replied, "I'm not proving anything. The room can sell tonight." Aaron checked the waiting list. A stranded couple with a child had already called twice. He did not pretend the lost revenue was abstract anymore. Dana picked up the key from the counter but did not put it back on its hook until Calvin had removed his things.
For 10 minutes, Aaron searched for another option inside the property. Behind the office was a small maintenance storage room with an old sleeper sofa, a wall heater, and no guest room number. It had once been used by an overnight repair worker, but Aaron's purchase inspection had specifically listed it as non-rentable space because it lacked the required guest room safety features and proper egress. He told Calvin the room was empty and warm. Calvin asked one question: "Can you legally put a guest in there?" Aaron hesitated, then said no. Calvin zipped his coat. "Then don't solve one bad boundary by making another one." Aaron said he was not planning to charge him. Calvin answered that payment was not the point. If Aaron had spent 2 days explaining that rules mattered because somebody had to carry the risk, hiding him in a storage room during the first difficult night would make the whole conversation meaningless. Dana looked frustrated with both men, but she did not argue. Aaron locked the storage room door after Calvin walked away from it. Aaron picked up the desk phone and called 2 independent motels on the other side of town. The first had no vacancies. The second had one small ground floor room because a reservation had canceled before the highway closure. The rate was higher than Calvin's Room 12 minimum, but low enough that Calvin said he could cover one night. Aaron wrote the motel's name and number on a receipt slip and slid it across the counter. He offered to make the reservation. Calvin took out his own phone and said he would do it himself. He called, confirmed the rate, gave his own name, and paid with his own card. Aaron did not offer reimbursement. Calvin did not ask. Before leaving, Calvin told Dana he would check back after noon the next day if traffic cleared. Dana said she would not hold Room 12 unless the occupancy numbers allowed it. Calvin nodded. "That's what we said." When he drove out, Dana watched his truck disappear into the line of brake lights. The stranded family checked into Room 12 20 minutes later at the full posted rate.
By Sunday afternoon, the highway had reopened, and the parking lot had emptied almost as quickly as it had filled. Room 12 was vacant again after housekeeping finished the turnover. Calvin returned before sunset and stood at the desk with the same canvas duffel he had carried in on the first freeze. Dana checked the occupancy screen before touching the key. This time she did not need to make a private judgment. The motel was well below the winter threshold. Aaron came out of the office carrying 3 printed pages. He placed them on the counter beside the old ledger. The draft now included a fixed nightly cash minimum, a separate housekeeping component, a monthly cap on maintenance credits, a list of prohibited work, written approval for eligible jobs, and Calvin's right to refuse any task without losing the guest rate. It also preserved the occupancy cutoff that had sent him away 2 nights earlier. Calvin did not reach for the pen. Dana did not reach for the key. Aaron opened the agreement to the first page and turned it toward them. The facts were no longer hidden in 6 winters of shorthand. What remained was deciding which terms each of them could actually live with.
Calvin read the agreement from the first line to the last without rushing. He stopped first at the nightly payment and asked Aaron to make the cash minimum fixed instead of allowing it to rise whenever the posted rate changed. Aaron agreed that predictability mattered if Calvin was expected to budget around it. They settled on an amount higher than some of Calvin's old winter payments, but still well below the standard room rate during low occupancy. The second point was the maintenance credit. Aaron wanted a monthly ceiling, so one difficult repair could not quietly erase weeks of lodging. Calvin accepted the cap after confirming that unused credit would not roll forward as something he owed the motel. The third point mattered most to him. He asked Aaron to read aloud the sentence, stating that Calvin could refuse any offered maintenance task and still qualify for the reduced guest rate if room 12 was otherwise available. Aaron read it. Calvin tapped the page once and said, "Keep that exactly the way it is."
Aaron had one condition he would not remove. The winter rate would apply only while the motel remained below the occupancy threshold written into the agreement. On designated high-demand nights, room 12 could return to normal inventory, and Calvin would need to check out. Aaron added that the motel would give advance notice whenever reservations made that possible, but sudden highway closures and emergency demand might leave less warning. Calvin read the clause and asked whether Aaron planned to hold room 12 for him after a high-demand night passed. Aaron said no automatic hold would exist. Calvin would need to call or return and confirm availability like any other guest using a restricted rate. Dana looked uncomfortable with that answer, but Calvin nodded. He said the sold-out weekend had already shown what the rule meant in practice. If the room is worth more to you that night, you sell it. Just don't tell me I'm guaranteed something I'm not. Aaron left the clause in place. The agreement became less generous than the old habit, but clearer about when the room belonged to the motel rather than to anyone's expectation.
When the pages were ready to sign, Dana noticed that her signature line had changed. She was listed as the employee responsible for administering the rate, recording approved credits, and checking occupancy. She was not listed as a guarantor, sponsor, or person authorized to promise future stays. Dana read the line twice. For 6 winters, Calvin's arrangement had survived, partly because she remembered what had been said, what had been paid, and which exceptions she believed the motel could carry. The new document took that private burden away from her, but it also took away the authority that had made the old arrangement possible. Aaron asked whether she objected to the language. Dana said, "No, I just know what it means." Calvin looked at her, but did not try to make the moment easier. Dana signed beneath her administrative role. Aaron signed as owner. Calvin signed as guest and participant in the optional work credit terms. The paper did not promise another winter. It only described this one, under conditions all 3 could see.
Marisol changed the housekeeping board the next morning. Room 12 no longer sat in a gray area between ordinary guest room and special winter arrangement. If Calvin stayed, the room appeared on the same turnover schedule as every other occupied unit, with the housekeeping portion of his nightly payment assigned to the department's operating total. Her staff no longer had to guess whether a reduced rate meant reduced service or unpaid extra work. Calvin continued doing what he had always done. Before checkout, he stripped the bed, tied his trash bag, and left used towels together near the sink. One of Marisol's newer housekeepers asked whether that was required under the new agreement. Marisol said no. Later, she asked Calvin why he still did it. He shrugged and said, "Because somebody has to pick all that up after I leave." Marisol told him that was different from owing housekeeping labor in exchange for the room. Calvin said he knew. The difference was exactly why he kept doing it.
The first serious test of the work restrictions came when a bathroom supply line began leaking behind the wall in room 6. Calvin looked at the maintenance note and told Aaron he could probably reach the fitting if they opened the access panel from the corridor. Under the old arrangement, Dana might have approved the job and settled on a credit before he started. Aaron checked the written list and said no. The repair involved concealed plumbing and the possibility of water damage inside the wall, which placed it outside Calvin's approved work categories. Calvin did not argue. Aaron called a licensed plumber and paid a service fee that was higher than the lodging credit Calvin would likely have accepted. Dana noticed the invoice and said the cheaper option had been standing 10 feet away. Aaron replied, "Cheaper isn't the only number anymore." Calvin later tightened a loose luggage cart handle under an approved small job ticket. The contrast was intentional. The new boundaries cost the motel money, and Aaron followed them anyway.
A week later, near the end of Dana's night shift, a woman arrived with a young child after their car overheated several miles from town. They needed one room until a repair shop opened in the morning. The motel still had empty inventory, and the woman hesitated when Dana quoted the standard rate. Under the new policy, Dana could still authorize a defined distressed traveler discount within a written range. She checked occupancy, entered the approved code, and showed the woman the reduced total before processing the payment. There was no private ledger mark and no balance to explain later. After they went to their room, Dana looked at the transaction on the screen. She told Aaron the next morning that the new rules had not stopped her from helping anyone. Aaron asked whether that surprised her. Dana said, "A little." What had changed was that she could see the motel's contribution before making the choice. She could still act, but she could no longer pretend the cost disappeared because the room might have stayed empty.
By early January, the arrangement had settled into something less smooth than the old habit and more durable than a favor. Calvin paid the fixed cash minimum every night he used, room 12. He completed 2 approved jobs that month, one on the luggage cart and another replacing damaged weather stripping on a service door, with each credit entered separately. When Dana offered him a third small job involving several hours of work above shoulder height, Calvin rolled his right shoulder once and said no. It had been bothering him for days. Under the old rhythm, he might have accepted simply because the room balance was sitting in the same ledger. Under the written terms, declining meant only that he received no work credit. He paid the guest rate instead. On several higher occupancy nights, he stayed elsewhere and returned when room 12 became available again. Nobody called those nights a failure of the arrangement. They were part of its price.
At the end of the month, Aaron closed the books with room 12 open on his screen. The room had earned less than it would have if every occupied night had sold at the standard winter rate. He did not hide that difference. Calvin's maintenance credits also reduced cash revenue. Though 2 approved jobs had replaced outside labor the motel otherwise would have purchased. Housekeeping appeared as an actual operating cost instead of an invisible assumption. High-demand nights showed full-rate revenue when Calvin had checked out. The numbers did not prove the arrangement was profitable, and Aaron did not need them to. They showed a bounded cost he could identify and explain. Dana stood beside him while he reviewed the ledger line. She said the old system sometimes felt easier because she knew what every shorthand mark meant. Aaron answered that knowing something personally was not the same as making it legible to everyone responsible for it. Dana looked at the clean entries and said, "I know." She did not sound relieved. She did not sound angry either.
On the last evening of January, Calvin came to the desk carrying the same plain envelope he had brought on the first hard freeze. Dana opened it and counted the cash. The amount matched the fixed minimum for his final January night in room 12. She entered the payment into the new system, then opened the current paper ledger because Aaron still wanted a physical winter record while the motel completed its accounting transition. Dana wrote Calvin Reed, room 12, the cash amount, and the corresponding receipt number. Her pen paused where the old initials would once have appeared. There was nothing to write there. No hidden balance had been converted. No maintenance job was waiting to be valued. No exception needed to be remembered later. Calvin watched her close the book and asked whether the account was clear. Dana said, "It's clear." He picked up the key. Aaron was working in the office. Marisol's housekeeping board already listed the room for the morning. The arrangement remained cheaper than a normal stay, but nobody had to decode why.
Looking back at the room 12 ledger, it would be easy to force the story into one clean judgment. Dana cared about Calvin, and that care had real value. Aaron worried about the books, and that concern had real value too. The arrangement preserved the form of dignity Calvin had insisted on from the beginning because he paid cash, accepted only agreed work, and refused to let lodging become a personal debt. At the same time, the motel still paid for heat, laundry, housekeeping, occasional lost revenue, and some labor credits Dana could not fully justify later. Marisol's frustration showed that a favor can fall partly on people who never negotiated it. Aaron's revised accounting showed something else. The motel had not lost the full retail value written on the rate card, but it had still spent money. Room 12 worked for years because several people carried different pieces of that cost. Opening the ledger did not make the compassion false. It made the price visible. What stands out most to me is not that Calvin received a reduced room. It is how often he refused to let the arrangement decide for him. He negotiated the cash floor instead of accepting free nights. He insisted that work remain optional. When the motel sold out, he returned the key before anyone ordered him out. When Aaron offered an unofficial storage room, Calvin rejected a shortcut that would have broken the very boundary they were trying to create. Later, when his shoulder hurt, he declined the job and paid the guest rate instead. Those choices made the written agreement different from a reward handed to someone because others felt sorry for him. The document gave each person permission to say something the old shorthand had blurred. Calvin could say no to work. Aaron could say no to unsafe or unpriced obligations. Marisol could insist that housekeeping be counted. And Dana could help without personally carrying every promise. The agreement was narrower, but the limits belonged to everyone who had to live with them.
Another cold night came before winter was finished. Calvin entered the lobby with his envelope tucked inside his coat and waited while Dana checked the occupancy screen. Several rooms were empty. Room 12 was one of them. Dana entered the reduced rate, counted his payment, and recorded the transaction on a clean line in Aaron's new ledger. Calvin placed the envelope beside the register while she reached for the brass key. For a moment, the scene looked almost exactly as it had on the first freeze. The same counter, the same room number, the same man waiting for a place to sleep through the cold. But Dana did not add 2 private initials beside the balance. There was no balance to hide. She slid the key across the counter. Calvin picked it up and headed toward the far end of the ground floor. Behind him, the ledger remained open. Room 12 was still discounted. It was still conditional. It was still costing someone something. Nobody called it free.